There's all those smiling faces. Greetings, everyone.
Good morning, Craig.
Good morning. Welcome to the, let's see, this must be May, the May meeting of the Democratic 21st Century Club. Glad that you could all make it. We have a really excellent speaker today. We sometimes we've been doing little breakouts right at the beginning of our meeting so that you can kind of introduce yourself and say hello to some people you haven't seen in a while. Our speaker does need to leave pretty close to right at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to skip that part for today.
Good.
But we'll get back to that in the future. And also want to invite you and remind you, if you haven't already renewed your membership, to please consider doing that. And the easiest way to do that is just to go to demcenturyclub.org and you can renew your membership there. When our speaker has finished speaking, you can submit your questions that you may have for her through the chat. If you're not real familiar or adept at that, you can also raise your hand when the Q&A period comes. Peter Allen will be moderating that and monitoring that and presenting those questions to our speaker, Delaine Eastin. I think that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. We're very fortunate today. This took a little tracking down because Delaine is a busy lady. But Delaine Eastin, as you may know, former two-term California Superintendent of Public Instruction. She also spent 8 years in the State Assembly. Come on now, quit that. Sorry about that. And 6 years in the City Council of Union City. Born in San Diego, raised in San Francisco, attended UC Davis and also UC Santa Barbara, and achieved her master's degree. As a state legislator, she was involved in many issues, including environmental issues, highway funding, education, and many others. As Superintendent of Public Instruction, she's actually the only woman to date who has ever held that office. We got to do something about that. And she also worked to bring a stronger technical and vocational training for students, also introduced the Garden in Every School initiative, and advocated for STEM education and return of the arts to K through 12. So as important as STEM is, so are the arts. She's also a strong supporter of LGBTQ rights and was working with University of California leadership to ensure domestic partner benefits. She's since gone on to serve and is serving as first executive director of the National Institute of School Leadership, and is active in getting more women elected to public office and getting more women involved in STEM education. Delaine, of course, also ran for governor a couple of years ago. You may recall she was our speaker back then. And she is also recently ran for the chair of the California Democratic Party. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Delaine Eastin.
Thank you very much, Greg. And my thanks to all of you for being here today. You should know I work to elect more women and then some good men as well. But the fact is that I have worked most of my adult life to show my love for this great state. And on my mother's side of the family, I'm a 5th generation Californian. On my dad's side, I'm a first because he was born in Kentucky. But nobody loved California better than he did. He used to say, quoting Mark Twain, Californians are people born somewhere else who came to their senses. So, but one of the wonderful things that happened, he came here with the United States Navy during the Second World War, and he met my mother. They were the odd couple, to be sure. And his parents were both Western Christian Temperance Union members, never drank a drop. And my mother's father was a bootlegger who owned a bar later. So there you go, only in California. When Daddy got out of the Navy, they looked around and they bought their first, and it turns out their only house. And they moved out of San Francisco, where I was in a classroom of 44 second graders, to San Carlos, where I was the 20th kid in the second grade class. And thereby hangs the tale. One of the things that I'm proudest of is that I did K3 class size reduction of 20 to 1 or less. And I had a woman stop me on the street a few weeks ago and said, "You don't know me, but you added 8 years to my teaching career." I went into the second grade the first week of school, and I had 34 second graders. And after the first week, I went home and told my husband, I'm going to teach the rest of this year and next year, and then I'm going to take early retirement. Because after the first week, it's the first time in my life I didn't know all the kids' names, and it's just too stressful. And the next year we did 20 to 1 class size reduction. And she stayed 8 years after that, she told me, because it was so much more satisfying for her as a teacher. And we didn't do it for the teachers, we did it for the kids. But I can tell you that that teacher in San Francisco was a very fine teacher. It's just that she had 44 children. And the one in San Carlos was a very fine teacher, and she only had 20. And thereby hangs the tale, as Pap would say. And so I really do believe that I was very fortunate, because when I went to school in California, starting in the 50s, people coming out of a depression and a war were amazingly generous to their children. And I was part of a generation of kids where California was in the top 10 of the 50 states in per pupil spending. We were tied with New York at 5th the year I graduated from high school in 1965. And when I became superintendent, we had dropped to 47th. So I went to court against Pete Wilson because the state constitution, you can look this up, Article 16, Section 8. Too many people who take the oath to uphold the Constitution have never read it. It actually says, from all resources, there shall first be set apart the monies for the education of children. It says that in the Constitution. The first thing we do is educate our children. And you know that's what you did in your families, isn't it? Don't your kids come first? You don't figure out how we all share in the pain. You try to keep the cuts as far away from your children as you can. And that was how we used to operate. But anyway, when I went to court against Pete Wilson, and he made fun of me for wanting to do class size reductions, that I was throwing money at a problem. But I actually had research that showed that it would make a difference. And so we won this lawsuit, and Pete Wilson said, well, we're going to go along, Delaine, we're going to let you do class size reduction, but instead of phasing it in over 4 years, we're going to give you 6 weeks. And really, he was setting me up to fail, because we didn't have enough portable classrooms. We didn't have enough credentialed teachers to do it in 6 weeks. But somehow we did it. And it's because of people like the people on this call. I know parents that took time off of work to go in and help the teacher set up the classroom. I know that people that weekend actually helped move the portable classrooms. We had to get highway patrol permission to run these double wide trailers on a 3-day weekend so that we could put the classrooms in, and the parents came to do it. They didn't have enough staff at the school. And what was wonderful about it was that it was such a sense of mission on the part of everybody. The gardens, same deal. By the way, we developed standards, and so you could teach math, science, history, and English language arts in the garden. Because think about it, you really want to understand perimeter. You really want to understand area. You really want to understand all kinds of mathematical, scientific. Oh, and there's some amazing poetry you may have heard. I think you'll never see a poem lovely as a tree. The fact is that you can teach the history of the world is the history of agriculture. And so we worked out these standards such that the kids were actually not just digging in the dirt, as the then governor suggested we were going to do, but they were really learning. And because of people like Alice Waters, she helped me develop not just a garden book, but a cookbook, so the kids could cook what they were growing. And we wound up with amazing stories. Del Norte County in the farthest northern corner of California, there were a lot of Laotian families, and they didn't feel very comfortable coming to school to help out because they didn't speak very good English. But because we had this teacher that put in a 5-acre garden, all these parents showed up, and they felt so much more comfortable at the school that they started taking English lessons, and they started engaging at the school. Down in San Jose, it was Latino parents. And at a school I went to in San Diego, it was an elementary school, each teacher adopted a country, and they put a garden that related to the food of that country. And so the kids would learn about how they grew different food in Africa than they did in Latin America and so forth. All of this by way of saying there's no more important work that we do in the state of California than to educate our children. And I'm very proud to say that we moved from 47th to 27th in the 8 years I was superintendent in per pupil spending. But guess what? Right now we're stuck at 21st. 21st, the most expensive state in the union. You know what we're number one in? We're number one in per prisoner expenditure. Now, who on this call thinks those are their values? I have not met a single person in California that has admitted to me that they thought that was a good plan. And so what we need is to remember that budgets are statements of values. And whether it's the budget of your family or the budget of your state or your city or your school district or your county, these are statements of values, and we need to make sure they reflect our values. And that means the children should come first. I remember one year when I was a kid, my brother and I wanted all sorts of stuff. My dad was a machinist. My mother was a Drex clerk. My father had been on strike for 2 months. They had used all their savings. And Danny and I, my brother and I, wanted all this stuff, you know, the way kids do. And guess what? We got virtually everything we asked for. My father got a key ring that said, "World's Greatest Husband." It cost $2. My mother did a little better than my dad did, but he got her something that she had wanted, a jewelry box. But still, my point is, the kids should come first. And so I ran for governor, not because I thought I was likely to win, because I'd been out of politics for many, many years. But I ran because none of the candidates, including the Democratic candidates, were talking about education. And one of my opponents actually gave me a shout out, thanked me for running, because it had forced the hand of the other candidates and they were beginning to speak of education. And they did a lot. And later, when I ran for party chair, I was trying to democratize the Democratic Party. Let me just tell you that too many decisions are made in the back room. You were at the convention, most of you. They set it up so people wouldn't really participate. Who would put all the 4 biggest, most popular caucuses in a meeting at the same hour? Unless you didn't want people to attend those meetings. Who would have all the votes, which require a quorum, on the last day? You know that a lot of people went home, that there wasn't a quorum. And so I ran because I wanted to grow the party, but I also wanted to democratize the party. The young people, many of them are registering as no party preference or declines to state, because we haven't stepped up and really stood for the things that we said we were going to step up for. And we haven't brought excitement to the party. We've got too many old ho-hum kinds of decisions when we ought to be, yes, we ought to have free college. We have big super majorities in both houses. If those people coming out of a depression and war can afford for us to go tuition free to college, and surely to God we can. That's how we got rich as a state. The Silicon Valley was born here, not because of a fertile crescent that was a convergence of rivers. You know, the Tigris and Euphrates created the fertile crescent of civilization. There are no rivers in Santa Clara County. Silicon Valley was born there because of great educational opportunities that the state provided to kids like me. And so I say to you, on the issues, our party has to come up for equity and for justice. Why aren't we building more affordable housing? Why aren't we buying up these old deserted factories and warehouses that are empty and building affordable housing along transportation routes. I'll tell you, I think the world of Jerry Brown, but he made a big mistake when he got rid of redevelopment agencies. We should have redevelopment agencies because that's what cities used to use to buy fallow land and disgraced properties and clean them up and turn them into housing. We did that in Union City. We had 3 different factories. And we also had the PG&E pipe storage yard where they'd stored all the PCBs. So we had to clean all of those sites. But guess what? Now there are affordable and market rate housing. Oh, and guess where they're located? Around the corner from the BART station. They walk out their front door, go around the corner, and get on the BART train. The kids have to walk a block and a half to high school, and the elementary school's 3 blocks away. Downtown is a block away. It's the ideal place. And that's what California needs to be doing. It needs to be looking in its urban cores for properties near transportation hubs and redeveloping them for affordable housing. And then we also need to start building a bench. Ladies and gentlemen, you know this. We have a lot of local elections, and yet the party doesn't get involved in them. Oh, they're not partisan. Well, that doesn't mean the party can't be involved. And in fact, if you run for local office, if you're on a city council or a school board, you're so much more effective when you get to the legislature or the Congress because you learn the issues. Look at me. I'm not a kid that knew a lot about garbage, but I represented Union City on the Solid Waste Management Authority. I learned, pun intended, tons about garbage. I wrote the biggest landfill cleanup bill in California history. I didn't go to the city council to learn about garbage. I had other things I wanted to know about. But along the way, I learned about waste. And let me just tell you, it's a shame and a disgrace that most of America is not recycling more than it is, because virtually all of the other first world countries are. They don't just take a piece of land, a resource, and dump a bunch of materials that could be recycled in that resource and lose both resources, a net loss for everybody. The fact is, we ought to be recycling. I wrote the bill that says if you make a bottle in California, you have to use a minimum content of recycled glass. And I put a tipping fee on everything you put into the landfill. But the garbage haulers have arranged to have that capped. It hasn't been moved up in over 20 years. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to lift the cap on dumping stuff in landfills. You know, all around the state, there are these fallow landfills that are turning into toxic waste dumps. They built some houses down in Southern California, and one day, and there was a closed landfill, it wasn't even open anymore. But migrating methane came off the site and all the water heaters blew up. Is that what you want? So there's a lot we can do. There are many examples of this. My point is, we need to build a bench of people that want to run for local office and help them get elected and prepare them to be the next generation of legislators and congresspeople. And oh, by the way, we also need to expand our donor base so that we don't allow people like the current chair to take money from fossil fuel industry and then kind of shrug and say, well, I kind of had to do it. No, he promised he wouldn't do it and he shouldn't have done it. Took money from Sempra Gas, a fossil fuel company, after he said he wouldn't. And Sierra Club called him out. Fact is that we need to get regular people to make a little donation every month rather than depending on the fossil fuel industry and the tobacco industry and others. And then we need to make the Democratic Party a team. There's no I in team. It's about people working together. And you know, you meet nice people in your Merced Democratic Party. There are nice people in the Calaveras Democratic Party and in the LA Democratic Party and all over this state, up in Del Norte County and down in Imperial. There's wonderful people. And when we get together and work together for the good of the future of California, we in fact will improve our state. But we also have to be very careful because there's a lot of cynics out there right now. There's an effort to recall the governor. because in fact, they figured out under Gray Davis that they can't win a regular election, but if they get enough votes by one vote to recall a governor, then you don't even have to have a majority to win the next round and become the next governor. And so, maybe it's a movie star like Arnold Schwarzenegger who's got personal wealth, and maybe it's a wealthy guy like Cox who's got his bear running around with him. Good God. Like that qualifies you to be governor of the state of California. But I'll just tell you, we need to fix this recall thing. You cannot have a situation where you wind up with 130 candidates, some of whom aren't even able to fog a mirror, and they think they ought to be governor of California. And we ought to protect Governor I started to say Davis because I'm living in the past. We really do need to protect our present governor. He has done nothing for which he should be recalled. If anybody wants to criticize his handling of the coronavirus, don't look now. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. No president has been more incompetent about handling a national disaster than Donald Trump. So to go after Gavin Newsom as not managing when he managed it very well compared to the knucklehead that was the president. But we have to be very careful. These are dangerous times. We need to get rid of the filibuster. We need to get rid of the electoral college, and we need to make sure that people are elected by the voters and not by some rigged system. And so I say to each and every one of you, thank you for being Democrats, for taking the time this Friday afternoon to meet and talk about the future of California. I like the jingle, so sing my friends, be blithe, be gay, or weep my friends with sorrow. California is today, the rest will be tomorrow. So let us make sure that tomorrow is about a California that's filled with engaged, involved people who want to grow our party around principles that are about, yes, the education and health of our children and families, yes, the environment, yes, productive society that pays people to work hard and play by the rules, and yes, a state that will dream about the future in ways. Let's get busy and build some more colleges and universities, and yes, some more career training centers. Fact is, think about it. Davis, California, where I live, is the furthest north UC system. You in Merced have the only campus that's been built since '65. That's shocking. 9 out of 10 were built by '65. Only 3 CSUs were built after '85, and only 14 community colleges. There's a 15th that's virtual. But most of this work was done by a bunch of people who went through a depression and a war. And yet they took the time and made the investment, dreaming of dreams for people like the people on this call. I don't know if you ever met your grandparents, but mine were very different. California grandparents were very different than the Kentucky grandparents, but they were all good people. And they all dreamed great dreams for their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And that's our responsibility. My favorite quote is probably Neil Postman's, who said, "Children are living messages we send to a time we will never see." What is our message? I hope it's one of optimism and purpose. I hope it's one of generosity and even love for the future. Is about our kids feeling empowered and excited about their opportunities. I know I felt that. And I really do hope we'll do that for the next generation of young people, because anything is possible in California. So I want to answer some questions, and I thank you for the chance to be with you today.
All right, thanks very much, Delaine, for that. I know I see a lot of virtual hands clapping out there. So thank you for your time today and for being so blunt with us. I think it's really important for us to take a hard look at where the party's headed. Just looking at some questions that appeared early in the chat. By the way, just a reminder to everyone who's joined us, if you have a question for Delaine, feel free to drop it in the chat. If you're not able to do the whole chat function, if you can raise your hand either virtually or perhaps by waving them frantically, I will scroll through the gallery and make sure I capture everyone. But just getting to some questions, we'll start from the top, actually. Our good friend Pete Garillo, who was here today. Thank you, Pete. He says that statewide reading scores, and this is true locally as well, reading scores for Mexican American / Latinx students are shamefully low. Over 1 million in the state, according to studies, cannot read at grade level. Do you have any thoughts about how we can remedy this glaring problem with regards to Latinx students in California?
Well, as I mentioned, we are 21st in per pupil spending. We need to reinvest in kids and their education. We need to have smaller class sizes. They've crept over 20 now. They were 20 to 1 when I was superintendent. They're now 24, 25. In some districts, they've gotten rid of class size reduction. Bottom line is we need to invest more. We need to have the governors on this. I haven't read the, maybe Rise has just come out. I saw it on the top of my computer screen. But I know he's going to add more money for preschool and child development. The fact is, what we now know is that many children who do have child development opportunities are more prepared to read when they get to kindergarten. But what's disgraceful in California is kindergarten is not even mandatory. Did you know that? 16 states, it's mandatory, not in California. So it ought to be mandatory. It ought to be full day. And we ought to have smaller class sizes in K-3. And we, as far as I'm concerned, we ought to have a longer school year. And certainly we ought to make things like summer school available to any kid who's behind. Because the truth is, most of the world's children go at least 200 days a year. In Asia, the kids go 220, 240 days in some countries. You get the picture? We go 180 or less. And so what we ought to do, excuse me, I have a responsibility here. I have a yellow fellow. Come on, boy. Come on, sweetheart. I'm sorry. I apologize. He was, I was out of town, so he's feeling a little needy. What we need is to make sure that the kids start out on absolutely time, that we don't let them fall behind because they didn't come to school till the first grade, because they didn't have a chance to go to child development, because they were maintained in. Do you realize that there are cases in California and America where kids are essentially locked in cages? They're put in cribs and the cribs are closed up so they can't get out. I've seen pictures of this. There are people that are desperate to have a better developmental opportunity for their little kids. And we need to make sure that we do that in every single community in California. Yes, certainly for our immigrant children, but there are children, not just Latinx, there are children coming here from all over the world. And many of them need extra scaffolding. There are many children that have only one parent, and that poor parent is working her heart out. Some cases his heart out. But the bottom line is we need to make sure that we understand that children really are the future of the state and our nation. And if we don't give them the support they need, look, we were talking about buying Chromebooks for kids because we were sending them home for distance learning. If I gave you the world's best lamp with the world's brightest bulb, and you didn't have electricity in your house, how would that work for you? A Chromebook for the 30% of the children in LA Unified that did not have access to technology was not a gift. Bottom line is, think about all the rural parts of the state. I know Merced is not a rural part of the state, really, because you have a university and a lot of other things. But there are people not that far from you that are in rural, remote regions of California. And the fact is, there are vast parts of California that do not have access to broadband. That we ought to treat it like rural electrification in the 1930s. That ought to become a right of every family in California. And we ought to do what we have to do to make that happen. If the companies themselves won't do it, and we can't help them, but if they won't do it, then the state of California should take the responsibility to work with the federal government and make it happen. I don't care how we do it, but it's not okay that we sent home 6 million children, and something like 30% of them really weren't doing distance learning. It's just a false illusion. And the other thing I would say is that we have to make sure that the kids are treated like they're unique, because they are. These are not McDonald's Happy Meals. Each one is different. Some have special needs. And if we give them the extra scaffolding, they can make a contribution. I had a first cousin that was a Down syndrome child, but her mom was a teacher and her dad was a World War II hero who was a rock star human being. And they made sure, even before, she's older than I am, so she was born before there was special education, really. And because of her parents, that woman made a contribution to this world and had a lot of confidence. Do you know that some special needs kids were named Edison and Einstein? Yeah. There are kids with special needs that have learning disabilities that are geniuses, but we have to be smart enough to make sure they get an education. And so I really and truly, I know I'm beating a dead horse now, but when it comes to education, California needs to step up again, because we did at one time, and we've been, shuffling along here lately, and it's just not acceptable. Number one thing we do is educate those children.
And I apologize, I have to correct myself. Pete, his question was very specific about Mexican American and Latino, especially Latino males and their struggles. Do anything specific? I've certainly encountered that issue a lot when I worked at San Jose Unified. Is there anything that you think can be done specifically with those populations to encourage, to improve outcomes and improve engagement with them?
It's a great question. When I was superintendent of public instruction, Pete Wilson passed Prop 227, which outlawed bilingual education. And you have a famous dual language immersion school in San Jose called River Glen. I know because my niece went there. She introduced me at the CABE conference, California Association of Bilingual Educators Conference, in perfect Spanish. And her best friend introduced me in perfect English. They were third graders in this big auditorium. And so under state law, it says, if all the parents at a school want to do something, the superintendent of public instruction, which was who I was, could issue a alternative school waiver to allow the parents to do what it was they wanted. Now, sometimes they wanted to go to school on Saturday, and sometimes they wanted to wear uniforms. But every single dual language immersion school in this state has a waiting list. And so I gave them all alternative schools waivers to continue to operate as bilingual education. And Pete Wilson sued me and I beat him in court. And now the voters have overturned Prop 227. And it's legal to have bilingual education for everybody. But in the meantime, we continued to have the bilingual dual language immersion schools because I had the guts to stand up to Pete Wilson. You know what you call somebody who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. Somebody who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. Somebody who speaks 1 language? American. The fact is, we need to teach every kid in this state at least a second language, but it would be a much better for the Latinx students if everybody was learning Spanish as well as they were learning English. And if more people were learning second languages, and we do have some second language schools that are teaching Japanese and Mandarin and Cantonese and some other languages. And so I just say, let's get more nimble the way the rest of the world has been now for decades, and do a better job of inviting our kids into a dual language world. And that would, what the research shows is the kids in a dual language immersion school don't do as well up through about the 3rd grade. And then they take off like rock stars because they're learning 2 languages. So they're not doing as well in the beginning in either one. But as they go into the 4th grade, they just take off. And that's what, you all have European friends who speak 5 languages. My niece went on from River Glen. She took Russian in high school or French in high school and Russian in college and Finnish. And she's now in the State Department working in Panama. That's what's possible. She's a little blonde kid, but what's true is that every single child in California should be learning multiple languages, and certainly our Latinx students should be given a chance to not only have exemplary English courses, but also exemplary Spanish courses so that they can do things.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and San Jose Unified is really proud of their dual immersion programs. They're now, it's now, at least when I was there, I think almost 10 or 11 schools actually, and they've created a full track from elementary through high school. So
Right.
really
My
exciting.
niece is 34. So.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, wish it could be funded more. I want to go to Annie because she's had her hand up for a little while here. So Annie, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Yeah. Cool. Hi, Delaine. I've heard a lot about your time as state superintendent, but I'm really curious, what was your, I guess, proudest one or two moments in the state assembly?
Well, I was, I had a lot of really wonderful moments in the state assembly. I mean, I really did appreciate my time in local government, so that when I did get to the state assembly, I was able to hit the ground running. And when I first got there, the speaker would not put me on the education committee because I didn't have kids of my own and I hadn't been on a school board. Like, those are requirements to care about education. I don't know. Anyway, but because he didn't give me what I wanted, he put me on the other committees that I asked for. So environmental, safety and toxic materials, transportation, governmental efficiency and consumer protection. And along the way, I also had some select committees that I got to be, I was chair of the Joint Committee on Gain Oversight, which was the effort to help people on welfare. So there were many really stunning moments. I mean, there were times that, you know, they wouldn't necessarily go in a book or anything, but somebody would just come up and give me a hug and thank me because my staff and I had helped with some problem a member of their family had. And there were times that we got things done, like the landfill cleanup bill, which was, a lot of people told me I was crazy, that there was no way I could get that bill signed into law, but it was signed into law. And there were some work that we did to crack down on unlicensed contractors who at that time were allowed to build 20 units a year, 20 houses a year. And a lot of them were building creepy, really uninhabitable houses, bad investments. And then when the people would turn around and try to sue them, they'd just go bankrupt. And so there were weird things that are not famous, but that allowed me to work effectively with members of the legislature, sometimes across the aisle. The women tended to be marginalized at that time, and there weren't many. I was part of the biggest freshman class of women in history. In 1986, women had the vote for 75 years. If you're not sitting down, you should sit down. Women had the vote for 75 years, and there'd been a total of 31 women in those 75 years. I was part of the biggest freshman class in history. First time ever 5 women were elected at once, if you can imagine that. So there were moments that, you know, we went, maybe just talk to a classroom, and there would be something that would happen that would just bring tears to your eyes. I take after my father, who had a 6'2.5" guy with a 19-inch neck. He cried much more easily than my mother did. So I take after his side of the family. But there are moments that you experience things with kids, whether it's in the library or in the garden or in the, I work to improve California school libraries. And I have a whole shelf still in my garage. I got rid of some of them, but one of my favorite books, which was on a number of different library shelves in the 90s, was I'm Glad I'm a Boy, I'm glad I'm a girl. Boys fix things, girls need things fixed. Girls can cook, boys can eat. Boys build houses, girls keep houses. Boys are presidents, girls are first ladies. Boys are police officers, girls are meter maids. These are actual quotes from a book that was all over California. Miseducating children in the richest state, on the richest country on the planet. And so I work to improve, there's a book out in the garage called Men at Arms, and it's about warriors from around the world. And the chapter on Africa is called African Savages. And of course, I work to bring technology to the schools. And I wound up getting help from, Hewlett and Packard and Steve Jobs and a whole bunch of other people who recognized that the state wasn't stepping up. And when I did Net Day, we asked people to volunteer. Pete Wilson made fun of me. So what are you going to get? 500 people? We got over 20,000 people that showed up to wire the schools of California. A guy named Bill Clinton and a guy named Al Gore showed up, and their whole cabinet, except for one guy, came. And after that, Al Gore announced he was going to push for something called the E-rate, to set up a fund to wire the schools of America. I was invited to the White House and had my picture in the New York Times, seated between Clinton and Gore. But it was all about listening to people in this state who said to me, Delaine, we've got to do something to get these kids online. And we did. And, in the end, and I will say to, Pete Wilson didn't show up and didn't turn out, but Tommy Thompson, a Republican governor from another state, showed up, and so did a lot of other Republican governors after they saw what we were able to do in California. And so part of it is just being willing to take risks, years ago, when one of the famous inventors, Alexander Graham Bell, was asked how he dealt with years of failure before he could figure out how to make the phone work. And he said, I don't look at it as years of failure. I know thousands of ways you can't make a phone work and one way that you can. And so part of what we have to do is inspire our kids to try again. And that's what this is really all about. It's about leading by example.
Thank you, Delaine. I really appreciate that. And you had a couple kudos in the chat, not necessarily questions, but kudos for your work as superintendent. So, and a few thank yous. So just wanted to pass those along. I want to quickly apologize to Annie for not using your preferred pronouns. So apologies for that. And thanks to Ali in the chat for asking us to turn on the closed captioning. We have done that. So you should be able to get a live transcript if you so choose. Couple more questions in the chat. I know we have a couple hands up, but kind of tied to each other. Jaime wants to know, it's frustrating how there's so many great ideas that most Democrats agree on, that we have Democratic majorities, super majorities in the state legislature, and yet doesn't seem like a ton is getting done to solve some of our biggest challenges in Sacramento. What and how can we do things differently to solve that?
Well, I think we have to raise our voices. I mean, really and truly, we have to engage and evolve in local Democratic parties like the one, clubs like the one you're part of, but in write letters to the editor, articulate on talk shows, speak in public gatherings where your legislators show up, ask them questions. Because, there's one of the biographies I read of one of the presidents listened very intensely to some people that had come to lobby him, and he listened to what the people had to say, and he said, now I agree with everything you said to me, Lyndon Johnson. I agree with everything you said to me. Now go out there and put some pressure on me to do the right thing. And that's part of what it is. It is about joining clubs and joining enterprises and writing letters to the editor and speaking out in public gatherings. People need to hear that we care and that we want this to happen. And there's so many things that happened in my lifetime, let alone in the history of the country and the planet, because somebody had the courage. The line I've always loved is speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. We have to be willing to speak the truth, and we have to be willing to challenge the system. I'm just shocked that the bill to ban fracking died in committee. And because of 3 Democrats, 1 voted no and 2 abstained. An abstention is like a no vote. I mean, you know, we had earthquakes before they were fashionable. I don't know if you know this, but Oklahoma had never had earthquakes till they started fracking. And then it puts, you know, this pressure on these fault lines, and all of a sudden they had earthquakes. Well, my grandmother lived through the '06 earthquake. Her grandmother died in it. The fact is that we have earthquakes, and we have no business fracking in the state of California. We have no business putting toxic water in the ground in a state where water is a precious commodity. We need to have people of courage and character. And for those who say, oh, Delaine, if we get rid of traditional fossil fuel industries, we'll lose a lot of jobs. We'll lose jobs in fossil fuel and create new jobs in clean energy. It's not like you don't need anybody to create wind power or to create, you know, steam power or to create solar power. You need people to do that work. And so what we all need to do is understand, look at nations like Iceland. They don't have fracking, but they do use steam out of the ground. And we have a lot of steam here in California, and I'm not just talking about Sacramento. The fact is that we can, in fact, generate a lot more energy than we're generating in a much cleaner fashion than we're doing. And if we spend more time and attention on doing that, it will mean the planet will survive. If we don't lead by example, it is very possible that your great grandchildren will be on a dying planet. Very probable, probably.
I would tend to agree with you there. And I really appreciate, and I know our chair, our county party chair, Bill James, who's here today, would appreciate your encouragement for everyone to get involved and get engaged at the local level and within your clubs and in activism with pushing on the state and pushing on our leaders to do more. So definitely check out the sccdp.org website, sign up for a club today, whatever your affinity group or geographic affinity, please do. Question from Kelly.
By the way,
Oh,
you'll meet some of the nicest people along the way.
That's true. Like all of us, we're a club. By the way, you can
Exactly.
join the Century Club. I want to thank Pete Carrillo, who asked a question earlier, for joining literally in the middle of this meeting. So thank you very much, Pete, for that. Quick question from Kelly Ryan in the chat. Wants to know, is there any way you think we can get rid of the recall option at all? I mean, it's pretty much codified, I think, in the state charter, but do you think there's a way we can easily get rid of that option, or should we? I
think we should certainly change it. It shouldn't be just you get 50% plus 1 to recall somebody, and then just whoever gets the most votes becomes the next governor. That's nuts. So there ought to be some kind of a runoff between the top 2 or something. But the fact is that, you know, I just think there's not good reason to recall the present governor. Gavin Newsom has not done anything that justifies his recall. He's managed the pandemic better than many governors, and certainly better than the last president did. And for that to be the reason that a bunch of people are citing as the reason to recall him. Oh, by the way, the irony of it is a bunch of the anti-vaxxers are writing the biggest checks. So they're mad that he didn't vaccinate enough people fast enough, and the anti-vaxxers are the ones that are trying to get him recalled. It's like a Fellini movie. You can't make this stuff up. But it ought not to be that you just get the most votes and you get to be the next governor. That's not sensible.
So maybe we can look at some reform to that in the near future.
Yeah, you can amend the state constitution, and we ought to figure out how to clean that up.
Would that take I'm guessing that would take a vote of the legislature, but then a public vote as well too, right? As far as
I think so, yeah. I
a
believe
referendum
that's
is concerned.
current state of.
Well, Kelly, if you want to lobby a local legislator, maybe we can work on getting that moving. Craig, I see your hand up. Would it be okay if we went to Lynn real quick before we wrap up with your question?
Sure.
Lynn, are you able to unmute? Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, Delaine. Sorry, I'm not showing my face. I'm eating. I met you when you were running for governor at a PDC picnic and went up to you and asked you about your support for single payer. And you said you strongly supported it. So I want to thank you for that. Unfortunately, we had a bill, AB 1400, but 40% of the Democrat assembly members are not for single payer. And there are millions of people dying. I wish you were our governor. I hope you're writing a book about your life. It's so interesting. I would just want to thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I'm thinking about writing a book, but it's also true that, you know, there've been some great ideas in history that took a long time to get realized. And I'm just convinced if people like the people on this call continue to push, that we will in fact get something like single payer into the law. And I mean, what's ironic to me is how many people I know who've gone to Europe and gotten sick and raved about how not only great the care was, but how their bill was like $28 for a bathrobe. That it was essentially, even though they weren't citizens of that country, the country didn't hose them for you know, life-saving surgeries or, you know, things that were done to help them. With one person I know's sister-in-law got hit by a taxi cab and she had a real serious injury. But, you know, the truth is that this is not wacky. And by the way, remember, they predicted that Social Security would bankrupt the country. And then, oh, that crazy Lyndon Johnson comes up with Medicare. Well, if Social Security didn't do it, Medicare will, for sure. And it didn't. And neither will single payer, just as it hasn't in France or Italy or Germany or, you know, and these are not, you know, leftist knuckleheads. These are sensible people who are taking care of their people's health. And it's what we should be doing. There was a guy on NPR a few months ago, and he hadn't seen a doctor. He's been working full time, and he hasn't seen a doctor in 18 years because he doesn't have health insurance at his job. And when somebody sees a doctor, it's his kids. And so at the end of the day, I just think, come on, let's not be penny wise and pound foolish. There are so many people that die of really minor problems because they didn't get to a physician on time. And so let's not be penny wise and pound foolish, Pap used to say.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn, for your question. Craig, do you want to wrap
Yes.
this up with your question?
Delaine, thank you so much for joining us today. One of the ongoing tragedies and to my mind obscenities about our current educational system is the burden of student debt. We seem to have it right coming out of the Depression and World War II and with our UC system back in the 50s and early 60s. So two questions. What happened? How did we get into this mess? And second question, what kinds of things do you think we could do at the state level and the national level to help fix it?
Well, first, it wasn't perfect coming out of the Depression and the war because under the College Student Loan Act, women could not borrow money until they were 21. Men could borrow at 18. So my girlfriend Karen and I were the only two of the women who went to college because our parents paid for their daughters to go. But my parents, a machinist and a dress clerk, had to borrow the money at 7% interest. So by the time I was 21 and I could borrow the money, and the law changed that year, they put women, I don't know if you know this, they put women in the Civil Rights Act because they thought that might kill it. You really go that crazy, that might kill it. And so it wound up being law. And so when I was 20, the law changed. But the fact is that my parents, even though they were not college graduates, wanted me to have the same rights my brother had. And they helped me go to college, even though they were paying twice their house payment on my student loans because they had to borrow the money on a 3-year loan at 7.5%. The student loans were 4%, and you didn't start paying until 9 months after graduation, and you had 10 years to pay it back. So for my parents to have done that was quite unusual, and I thank God every day that they did it. Having said that, I really do think the sin was that Reagan was governor of California, and he started raising the student fees because he said they were getting these great educations and we ought to have to pay more for it. And the regular people shouldn't subsidize the college bound kids. And I believe that the subsidy is that you make a lot more money when you go to college, and therefore you can pay more taxes. And that's how you pay the state back. But, we need to do a much better job of education from preschool to graduate school. And that should include certainly tuition-free undergraduate education, not just community college, but the bachelor degrees should be absolutely paid for. And then we ought to do whatever we can to reduce the graduate degrees. Admittedly, some of these jobs pay very well, but the fact is, if you do choose to go into public service, then there ought to be some kind of forgiveness clause. If you're a public health doctor or you work in the military with, as a physician, or you are a lawyer for a public interest law firm and there is some provision for that now, by the way, there is some forgiveness, but it's only, I think, something like 10%, or it's not much. And so I think we ought to do more to encourage people to go to get additional education, because that's the world looked at America and said, how are they getting so rich? Oh, they're educating their kids. Let's try that. And in just a couple of generations, China's totally transformed because they decided they would educate all their kids. And I just feel like it isn't just about you get a better life, you get a better education, although you do, but it's also about you get to make more contributions along the way if you're sensible, and you get to appreciate and enjoy more things. And I've lived long enough to know that I have friends in both parties. I have people that are all over the world that I know that are good people. And essentially, if you have enough education, you're more likely to find a path that is not just good for you, but good for the people along the way. And that's what we need as a society to do.
Delaine, here's a softball. How do you feel about debt cancellation?
Well, I'd love to see us cancel. We have to figure it out, because you don't just cancel debt. You have to figure out a way to, let's say, create a fund for the next generation so that they can have free college. But having said that, I do believe that one of the things I learned in the private sector was they know the difference between expense and investment in the private sector. You want to hold your expenses down. You don't want to waste money, but you have to know when to spend money, or you won't be competitive with other companies and other businesses. And when I got to the legislature, I was surprised that a lot of the people at the Department of Finance didn't seem to understand the difference between expense and investment. They were trying to cut costs everywhere. That's why the DMV is such a mess. That's why EDD is such a mess. They haven't bought a modern computer system for for the EDD in like 50 years. And when Gavin won the primary, I met with him and I said, if there's a couple of agencies you really need, there were actually 3 I mentioned, Caltrans, DMV, and EDD. And I said, EDD is a train wreck. And guess what? It's a train wreck. You know, the fact that we're sending money to people in prison is shocking. And so it's pay me now or pay me later. If we invest the money in good management, good technology, good computer systems, good staff, then we will save a lot of money down the road. But saying I'm saving money because I have a 50-year-old computer isn't saving money at all. It's, you know, literally hundreds of millions, billions of dollars have been wasted because we didn't know the difference between expense and investment. And we need more people leading government who understand the difference, because it's important.
Thanks, Delaine. I know we are at time. We're actually a little bit
Yes.
past 1 now, so I want to let you go because I know you have a board meeting to get to, and we want to make sure that you're fulfilling all your responsibilities. But thank you so much for the time today. I know everyone appreciates it. If you want to give your virtual hands to Delaine.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Delaine,
very
and,
much.
bless your heart for being alive, and thank you for spending some time with us today.
Well, I'm happy to be alive, but I'm happy to have spent time with you all. And thank you for what you're doing as Democrats to take us down a better path. And
All right.
hang in there and stay engaged and engaging.
You betcha. Thank
Call on me
you.
again. Take care.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Count on it.
Okay, Craig, so we can wrap it.
Yes,
wrap it
I
for
think
today.
I think we're ready to wrap up. I'll just mention that. Well, first, let me check and see if Bill, do you have any particular announcements that you want to make, party related?
Thank you for the opportunity, Craig. I'm going to get the team ready because Peter and Craig, I don't think we acknowledged our guests who are elected officials. If we
Yeah,
want to
thank
take a
you,
minute,
actually, Bill.
we can do that.
Let's, sure,
Yeah,
let's do that.
we'll
Thank
do
them
that.
for joining
My
us.
one announcement I'll make, we're working with Kings County in the Central Valley, Stanislaus County, San Joaquin County. We're working to be ready in 2022 to protect Josh Harder and try to retake that seat that TJ Cox had. We know the lines of the districts are moving, but the county lines are not going to be moving. So we're helping strengthen the county Democratic Party in these areas so we can partner with them to elect Democrats in 2022. Part of that effort is a fundraiser we're doing on May 27th. As you do the elected officials, I'll put the link in the chat. And at that event, we just got word that in addition to Zoe Lofgren, who's one of our supporters in this effort, we're going to have Katie Porter and a couple other great Democrats, Josh Harder, TJ Cox, and some statewide officers. So all 5 counties together, if you're curious about the Central Valley and want to support that effort, the early bird tickets are available through tomorrow. They're only $22. And so it's the best ticket to see and hear from Katie Porter. I'll put that in the chat. Thank you very much.
All right, and also want to let everybody know that our program for next month, I am able to announce this time, we're going to have Assemblyman Mark Berman will be our featured speaker for our June meeting. Peter, you want to maybe kind of identify our electeds who have joined us, and we can thank them collectively?
Absolutely. Should have done this sooner. I want to thank David Cohen, council member from the city of San Jose, District 4, for being here, and a longtime Century Club member. Thank you, David, for showing up. I know you're very busy right now with budget proceedings, so thank you for being here. I see former council member Forrest Williams and our current treasurer here. So Forrest, thank you as always for being here. And want to recognize, of course, our illustrious county party chair, Mr. Bill James. And I know I saw Celeste Walker in here earlier. She's with Senator Cortese's staff. So on behalf of Senator Cortese, she was attending. So thanks, Celeste, for being here. And as always, if anyone else wants to announce themselves as a candidate or an elected official that I may not recognize or we may not recognize, you're free to unmute yourselves and do so now. I know there's lots of boards out there that I'm not aware of. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself real quick to everybody. My name is Jaime Raul Cepeda, and I am running for the open seat in State Senate for District 10.
Jaime, welcome. Thank you so much. And thanks for emailing us. I believe I was the one that got back to you. But so thanks for joining us.
Including me.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And feel free to join us in the future and to keep us informed about your campaign. We don't do candidate endorsements, especially at the state level in our club, but we're always welcome. We've always welcomed candidates to come and be heard, and perhaps we'll even be able to do a candidate forum or something like that in the near future on your race. All right, well, Craig, that's all I see as far as folks out there. Of course, my mom is here, so hi, Mom.
Yes. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at next month's meeting. Be safe, be well, get your shots if you haven't already, and bless your heart if you already did.
Thank you, team. Thanks, Craig.
Bye, everyone.